Peace, everybody. I am the Emma, that's Energy Master Allah, known to some of you as Chris Wind. And I felt, it's 2025. I didn't want to wait too much longer to do this. As some of you know, I am in the middle of working on a book and have been for quite some time. For the past 5 years, I have been delving into research on a number of topics, um, a couple of things in particular, and it started to become apparent that the density of that material, the density of the underlying knowledge that is necessary to even understand the text, is such that I had no choice but to break it down, break it down, break it down to even make the language manageable. And I just say that to say the complexity to which the truth has been, I don't want to say altered, but there are simple answers to life's biggest questions. There are simple answers to the keys. I know a lot of the things that people concern themselves with is being free. Being free, you may not even know what it is that you want to be free from, but you have this deep rooted sense that something is off. And I know already that's starting to sound like that speech that Morpheus gave Neo in the Matrix. And even the movie The Matrix has become a matrix of its own, in the sense that it has become a meme to where there's even types of psychological barriers that present themselves when a person even hears that term. So, what I want to talk about, after racking my brain on what I'd be able to offer you that would be of the most value to you, it occurs to me that there are many sources in this information age, so called, that present what they claim to be the truth, and they present what they claim to be the evidence for said truth. So, in other words, you have plenty of sources that are telling you what the truth is, and not nearly enough sources that are made readily available that will allow you to have the tools necessary to assess said truth in a way that allows you to convert that into something applicable to your life. And make no mistake about it, your life is the life of humanity. Your life is the life of this planet. If one of those other two factors are erased, so too is your life. Because there are services that you depend on. There are gifts and skills that you came in with. There's gifts and skills that other people came in with. And we have this interconnected tapestry of reliance on the whole, even though you can operate independently in the sense of being able to take care of yourself and things of that nature. You still have to, even if you're able to make money, you still got to rely on, if not a job, or the people who manage your accounts, or it's always somebody, some service that's involved with said independence. So the idea of being completely independent is illusory, but it's more like a collaboration of able individuals, if you will. So this is what we want to get to when we talk about independence, because after all, the Declaration of Independence wasn't written by or presented by one person. So how we ended up making that the meaning of that is beyond me. But I say all that to say, there are existing tools, and I will share what is available from my experience to give you a better shot at being able to uproot um, what is true and be able to convert that into something that will be of use immediately. Okay, so the best way to present that is to, I suppose, delve into the nature of my education. So, step one, you, before presenting any type of information, have to establish some basis of what occurs as credibility to your audience. So notice that I didn't just say that you have to present your credibility, because you know which accolades, you know which things you have done, you know what you've accomplished in your education level. But the blind spot there is that we assume that what we find to be credible does not occur as such in everybody we encounter. For instance, if I run into, let's say, a drug dealer, for instance, he doesn't necessarily care about which college I attended. He wants to know what kind of name I have in those streets, right? So his assessment of credibility with regards to dealing with him is very different from the assessment of credibility that you would use in order to deal with, say, an employer or a trying to get admission into an Ivy League school, for instance, right? So here we already have a problem. Okay. So I'm not certain what occurs to you as credible, but the best I can do is present my qualifications to speak on the subject, and you can determine for yourself whether I'm even worth listening to. Now, I can tell you right now, the only paradigm that will allow for us to collectively, as a human race on this planet Earth, to be able to overcome the challenges which have stagnated our ability to advance and live harmoniously is not only to be able to approach each subject with love, but you have to break through the barrier of your linguistic limitations with regards to the understanding of what love is, because it has been twisted, distorted, and varied in so many different ways. And so a more useful word in this conversation would be receptibility, which means your willingness to at least hear something out before casting some sort of judgment. And the example that I tend to give with regards to that, whether you're religious or not, there's certain places in the Bible that people will point when you bring up, oh, let's show examples of love. Let's show examples of Jesus's love or stuff like this. And almost never, and I'm the only person that I've heard do this so far. There may be others, but just as in terms of what I've personally encountered, whenever I talk about love in reference to the Bible, I usually point to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's the scene where Jesus is fasting and he is tempted by Satan during this period of time where he Satan is telling him like, oh well, why don't you turn these rocks into bread if you're so hungry, and so on and so forth. And then Jesus would casually respond to that. And so the reason I point to that particular story as an example of love is because it's easy to love people you like. And what was happening in that scene is that you don't see Jesus talking about, oh, get thee behind me, say, da, 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 shut that up, I don't want to hear that. He calmly hears Satan out, because Satan is over here quoting like, oh, the scripture says that, angels would come at your beck and call because you this, that, and the other. And he wasn't wrong about that. But Jesus just casually, instead of getting upset, he casually counters Satan's argument with another scripture, basically saying, well, it also says, in one case, he's like, it also says, do not tempt the Lord thy God. Saying things like this. So, case in point is that understanding receptibility means being able to hear what a person presents as true without the fear that it's automatically going to affect you or change you in some way. And also being receptive enough to where if there is truth in what's being said, to the degree that it would add value to you, that you are able to receive that. And then that is where the dilemma lies, in which hungry mouths are being overly discerning in where they get their food and being overly judgmental about where other people get their food. Now, it takes a type of strong resolve not to resort to some alternative methods to take care of yourself, to take care of your family. When you are in a state of desperation, or if you are in times of duress or war, you will see human beings make decisions they wouldn't under other circumstances. So it is important for us to be understanding in that regard as it relates to context. Okay? There's this thing called context, and this is a lovely word that basically means that you can't take a particular action, or you can't take a person's specific words simply on face value without also knowing the circumstantial things that are happening around why they're saying what they're saying. And then, so this is one of the problems that only sentient human beings and such beings like ourselves have to encounter, because dogs don't have to worry about that. Cats don't have to worry about that. Their context is living, and all things are included in that context. They respond to everything as a whole. We're the only ones that are sitting out here cutting it apart, chopping it up, picking and choosing between how I want to feel about this, how I want to feel about that. That is one of the most deceptive qualities, because there's a concept called the bliss body, otherwise known as the Anandamaya Kosha in Eastern thought, which refers to a state of bliss that rises above and beyond many of the trappings of physical existence. And the problem with the bliss body is that it relies on preference in order for you to enjoy it. Your joy in that state is supported in comparison to those things you do not enjoy. Your likes are being supported by those things you do not like. How you transcend beyond that, instead of getting comfortable there and getting stuck, is understanding that from situation to situation, there's something different things may be needed, different things may be necessary. And if you become rigid in your preferences, you might not be able to uh, apply the method or use the correct tool or weapon necessary in that situation. So this brings me to something that I suggest we all add to our vocabulary, our education, our lexicon, which is Bohr complementarity. And then, yes, I said I would kind of lay out what my education is and how I came to these things, but I'll do that in just a moment. But I'm introducing to you this concept of Bohr complementarity. That's Bohr, Bohr. That is a reference to the award-winning physicist Niels Bohr, who gave us the popular models of atoms and other things in chemistry that we still use to this day. And in the concept of Bohr complementarity, he states firmly that you cannot separate a measurement. So the thing that you are measuring, you cannot separate it from the tool being used to measure it. And this also, just to give you an example that may be relevant to you and your experience, we talk about reality TV. So several years ago, so as some of you know, some of you don't, I worked for George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. I was recording this studio. I was involved in all sorts of things that they had going on, particularly in Tallahassee while I was attending Florida A&M University. I was in their school of business and, graduated 2009. And so while I was there, they were starting to talk about shooting a reality series. And so this was where I kind of started to learn the process behind the scenes of how a reality series is put together. So it is real in the sense that you have people's reactions to things, but it is orchestrated in the sense of they will script certain events or put you in certain types of environments or situations, and then from there see how you react. Well, the problem is, and this is a problem that is common in science itself, is that when a person knows they're being watched, they will always have a tendency toward behaving slightly different than they would if they weren't being watched. If you do candid camera where you hide hidden cameras, people have a tendency to act one way, but just in knowing that cameras are on you, you're already trying to put on your best face. You're trying to put on your most intense version of yourself. So whether that be for better or worse, people are going to act out more, or they're going to behave more if they know a camera is on them because they know people are watching. So yes. Okay. And so in that sense, you cannot separate the measuring from the tool that you're using to measure. And to give you some etymology, the word mind, the word measure, both come from the same language root. So the primary tool that we have in order to measure reality is the mind. And so because that tool is involved, you cannot separate what you're looking at, what you're sensing, what you're measuring from your own mind. Your mind has an effect on how those signals, how that information is coming into it. So before you even get the truth, your mind is already putting up certain barriers, is putting up certain preferences, is doing all kind of stuff to that information before it ever reaches inside of your head. So in that already lies a problem. Why is that? Because where did you get your tools? Just like I know if I went to Home Depot and I bought a power tool, it may not be the same power tool that I get from Lowe's, and it damn sure ain't going to be the same tool that I borrowed from Leroy down the street. And so your mind is constantly being shaped. It's constantly evolving and changing based on new information or your emotional reactions to information. So before we can even get to the truth, we have to deal with the fact that we're constantly transforming that truth before we ever get a chance to react to it. So this is one of the base situations as it relates to human beings. And so in order to address that inherent situation, you started having the creation of what is called an agreement reality. That means that there are some things, well, a lot of things in this world that only exist because you agree that it exists. There are certain things that you weren't born knowing, you weren't born having to do, that only can exist if you agree that that thing is real. Let's take, for example, money. So, yes, there is a physical piece of paper or a physical coin, or there is a screen that you could pull up on your phone or your computer that tells you a certain amount that you have in the bank. That part of it is real. So the physical interface or tool that you use to interact with that information or, whatever, that part of it is real. The concept of money is not real. It is something that had to be constructed and created, and you had to agree upon it. Somebody told you that this piece of paper that has George Washington's face on it, that has Andrew Jackson's face on it, that has Benjamin Franklin's face on it, has a value. We both know that these are men who lived in the 1700s. So does that mean that nothing had a value to it before George Washington was born or before Benjamin Franklin was born? But until we had the ability to put one of these dudes' faces on something, it didn't have value? No, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. So there is nothing intrinsic, which means there's nothing embedded or just naturally valuable about that money until you agree upon it, or until you are living in a framework where you have no choice but to accept something as real. And that's pretty much the case, because you do live in a country, you do live in a society where in order to get food, you can't even grow fruit in your own yard. Nowadays, you can't even catch fish in the creek behind you nowadays without having a license of some sort. You got to be certified to grow in your own stuff, unless you just have, mad property like that to where nobody could stop you if they wanted to. That's an option, I suppose. But if you are one of these legal beagles, one of these legal eagles out here that wants to do everything according to the book or whatever, no, you can't just go out there and just make food. How dare you? You're not a farmer. How dare you? And so you have to earn money just to do the stuff that your body needs in order to be able to operate. It's wild. It's a wild concept, and it was unheard of once upon a time in human history, but somehow we still walked into it. We felt that there was some benefit to it. Mostly the benefit is that it allowed certain people who weren't adequate at agriculture or building houses, these people who did not have these skills, they found a way to instead employ something that isn't of intrinsic value in a way to where a person can perceive it as valuable and then trade their non-valuable thing for something that is of value to somebody else. Okay, so that's a tricky game right there. That's some bull. Right? Okay, so we already have a problem with reality as it relates to them. So just between you and me, we can all agree that you are not interested in the underlying truth of the universe whatsoever, because your ability to live in this society, this reality that we are in, it wholly depends on you subscribing to certain things that are only true as a result of everybody socially agreeing on that thing being true. that allows me to then introduce to you the concept of an axiom. So this is another word that you might want to add to your vocabulary. So an axiom, which is spelled AXIOM, is essentially a base assumption that is agreed upon and accepted as being self-evident, quote unquote, which forms the foundation of every other truth that you're going to build. So in other words, you've got a set of assumptions. We assume that if I multiply 1 times 3, it's going to be 3. I assume that if I multiply 0 by anything, it's going to be 0. These are what we call axioms, okay? And so this means that there are a set of truths that a group of people have to agree to in order to prop up the entire rest of the reality that they're going to present or impose upon a people or whatever else. And right now, even in saying that in your head, you could probably think of quite a few examples where a people who believed in one thing were forced to believe in another set of things just for them to be able to live and operate in the society that was growing around them. Okay, so this is where the hard stuff comes in. So if we're going to talk about assumptions, this is one of the foundations. So this is, I don't care what cultural background you are, I don't care where you're from, what age group you are in. There are certain axioms where if you make these your base assumptions, they will set you free because they predate any other known assumptions. And there is this concept in math and philosophy and just all the means we use to assess reality. There is an axiom. There's a method to create axioms, and this method has a tendency to try to avoid what is called infinite regression. That is infinite regression. And what this phrase means is if I have something that I'm saying is true and that truth is reliant on something that came before it, you can get caught in this infinite loop of constantly having to go back. This thing is true because of this thing is true because of this thing is true because of this thing. You can get into an infinite loop because of that. So that means that somewhere at some point as human beings, people had to agree on a stopping point. They said this is going to be the base assumption. Everything else is going to be built off of that. You can already hear a problem in that because depending on where you stop the buck, some people benefit more than others. Let me say that again for the slow people in the back. Already, you can hear that depending on where you stop, when you're talking about something originating, this connection keep on messing up. When you're talking about something originating and truths that depend on truths that came before them, depending on where you stop, it's going to give one people or another an advantage. This is one of the reasons why it is so sexy for America to allow African Americans to only really engage with their history based on American history, which is to say, since we've been over here as citizens of the United States of America. And so if your history is being predicated on a time where you were enslaved and you were not considered a citizen, let alone a first class citizen, then all of your base assumptions from henceforward in dealing with this country are rooted in that. Okay, so I told you that there would be a particular set of axioms that would set all people free. So my background, as I shared, I am a graduate of Florida A&M University's School of Business and Industry. It became readily apparent that as a creative who was involved in music and art, not just casually, but I was a art student in the International Baccalaureate, aka IB program in high school, which meant that I graduated with college credits already, and I put in that work while I was a kid. I had a free ride scholarship to Florida A&M, so I'm not just somebody walking around with a degree. I was somebody who was excelling and doing the work to do so. And it was a painstaking reality that at some point I would have to make a living for myself if I wanted to continue to do what I love to do. The best option presented at that time was to find a way to do those things in a way that also provides for my basic needs. Okay, and so it just made sense for me to learn business, learn how it operates, learn how money operates, learn how the market operates, all of this. Okay, and so after my formal education, after I graduated from Florida A&M in 2009, as I also mentioned, while I was in college, I started working with George Clinton, and I received a different kind of education during that time period because aside from music, George is a pioneer in a lot of ways. He not only changed music, but the way that business was done in the music industry. He was one of these first people to revolutionize the concept of having a band of members that you place at different labels with multiple deals, and you have multiple bands that have the same members, but you just have somebody else out in front, and then you have multiple deals. So he basically had deals at all the major labels all at one time. So instead of it being, oh, I gotta compete with this label, I gotta compete with that or whatever, he was getting money from every single label, and they did not like that at all because essentially he was bringing all those labels together. You had the same thing come around later with RZA and the Wu-Tang Clan, where he had different members that were at different labels, and they were the first group to ever lead Sam Goody, the top record store at the time, to have a Christmas basket that contained CDs from every single record label. Before that, they would all have their own separate competing stands and displays, but this was the first time they were all coming together in this way. In both cases, with George Clinton and with RZA, you had people who did not like that bringing together of these businesses, especially under the umbrella of a black individual. It's an unavoidable circumstance in this country, and they had certain challenges associated with that. And as you also know, you see my regalia right now. I have also worked with the Wu-Tang brand for quite some time. I was just hanging with my dude Mook, who was the first manager of all of Wu-Tang. I was just with him a few days ago, and so that's my credibility surrounding that particular situation. Okay, so after some time with George, back in the early 20 teens or so, I left from there. I worked a number of places and engaged in a number of different types of certifications and trainings, among which included the curriculum for living. There's a program called Landmark that I would have never heard about had George's right hand man Overton not told me about it when I was living in California. Peace to all those who are out in Cali right now dealing with the fires, But essentially, what this program to put it in context, the guys who wrote the Matrix are said to have been through this program before they wrote it, and this is what gave them an understanding of reality in order to be able to turn it into a science fiction representation of that. But essentially, this is where I learned the role that language plays in shaping reality, and I was engaged with various programs on and off with that with those teachings over the course of 10 years. I in 2000, let's see, that was before I got married, so that was 2011. I was ordained as a Universal Life Church minister, and that was a choice that was made based on my having decided whether or not I was more interested in my relationship with God or spirituality or whatever being dictated by an authoritative body on earth, or actually going to scripture and finding out what was the qualification for somebody to minister. And according to the scripture, it is a covenant that you make with God. Like there is no other authority that can grant you that. Now, I can tell you from a spiritual standpoint, and then mind you, I would, as a Universal Life Church minister, I wasn't bound to any specific faith or religion, but I personally made a commitment to learn about all of them so I could see where these common truths are. Right? I didn't want to just learn the language of, because you could all be saying the same thing, but if you're using different language, different symbolism, and different stuff like that to present it, it's easy for people to think that everybody's saying something different. So I was more interested in understanding enough about each for me to be able to say, okay, so I see that you're disagreeing on this, that, and the other, but then right here, here's this thing you have no reason to agree upon, but yet you're still agreeing upon it. It is in those situations that you find the keys to truth. What are those things that two people who have nothing in common, who have no reason to support, corroborate, or like each other, what are those things that they still undeniably agree upon? Those were the only things I've been interested for the past decade and some change. And that is what I have built my life around and my perspectives on. What are those things that people are agreeing on? Because, like I said, we live on an agreement reality, and there is a reality out there on which we agree, but don't even realize we are agreeing. And that is what I'm bringing to the forefront with that regard. So my education in life also came to include becoming a certified Qigong and Tai Chi instructor in 2014 under the Vero Beach Qigong Society. And this, I advanced enough in that over a couple of years in order to become privy to some of the higher level teachings of Taoist practices over in China. And this allowed me to understand the inner workings of the body and a more practical understanding of some of these words we throw around freely today, like what energy is and how it works, and understanding, the spirit and the soul and things of that nature. Not as something you memorize, but as stuff that they say, hey, do this thing, and then this thing happens. And then I go in there and I do the thing they said would happen happens. Just like any other type of scientific exploration. And that highlights yet another issue that we have as it regards to truth. So there's too much information out there that we do not then turn around and experiment with in order to integrate it. It's just, oh, I know more than you because I read more than you and I absorbed more than you, but you have not applied it in any type of way that shows something fruitful that will occur to somebody as application, if you will. Okay. And so I had that under my belt. Over the years, I would receive other trainings like certain ancient yogic initiations and practices, some of which took as long as 6 months of day-to-day practice and stuff of that nature. It is not the stuff that you get if you just walk into a yoga studio. I'm talking about stuff that um, I've gotten from a real yogi. I've participated in training regarding out of body experiences and things of that nature, like being able to go to the other side and stuff of that nature. And by combining certain tools, being able to discern between what is just a manifestation of the ego mind versus something that is a physical experience and things of that nature. So had to go through a lot to be able to test some of these things and not try to believe in something, but looking at the things that people believe in and that they prop their truth up on, and not, instead of judging it, like I just would actually experience it and engage with it the way that it's intended to be engaged with, and then just make my assessment based on that experience. Okay, and so I bring you back to some of the base axioms that need to be established in order for us to move forward as a species, let alone a country, let alone whatever. So one thing that I'll put it this way. Now, what I'm about to say, it is okay if you are able to admit to yourself that you are not concerned with logic, reasoning, evidence, or whatever else. If you find what I'm about to say inconvenient to the truth that you have agreed to prop yourself up on, you will have no judgment on my part, because that is what most people are doing. But you do have a right to make a conscious decision to disagree with said axioms. It is okay for you as a person to build for your life a type of truth that is not rooted in pre-existing underlying truths, so long as you are aware of how far your accepted truth deviates from that underlying truth, and you're willing to stand in it without the need for denying the other truth. Like, I would rather somebody straight up and say, like, yeah, I know shooting people is wrong, or like, I know you're not supposed to kill people because of the Bible, but I'm doing it anyway. I would rather you do that than you sitting out here lying, talking about what you're doing is right. Like, instead of you sitting out here lying, acting like you don't know the consequences of your action. That's the dangerous part. It's not the fact that you're not doing the thing. It's the fact that you're denying awareness of the thing. And then that is where some of us get into it with some of y'all, where we know we sitting there, something's happening to us every single day, and then you'll sit up there and say, oh, that's not possible. That's not possible. Not possible. Show just took my house and just, killed my grandmother and beat my teenage son. Like, I'm pretty sure my eyeballs saw what my eyeballs were seeing, and you're going to tell me it doesn't exist? Okay. So if we could get past that, that'll cut out half of the problem right off top. All right. So let's talk about some of these base axioms. Okay. And make sure that you look up and verify everything that I'm saying, because Lord knows I did. Like, I don't just have a thought and just go to the presses with it. I look it up through a number of credible sources to be able to determine whether, like, is this just me or is this actually a thing? Like, actually looking at that, because it is important, even if that thing is associated with the agreement reality, at least I will be aware of that so that I can address that, right? Okay, so the base assumption of your scientific community, the accepted academia, is that human consciousness as we know it now began 200,000 years ago with the emergence of Homo sapien, that is the species designation for us modern humans. It is commonly accepted that that is when consciousness as we know it emerged, and this is evidenced by the complexity of the tools and creations and things of that nature that emerged from that time. It is also agreed upon by that community that this transition into this consciousness occurred on the African continent. And it is also understood that the necessary mutations and adaptations that produce what we today would consider a lighter person happened largely about 50,000 years ago in the Levant. And for those people that we would call a white or Caucasian, those necessary mutations took place between 6 and 10,000 years ago with the mutation of the OCA2 gene, which is what causes the type of albinism that removes the melanin from the eye color and makes it blue, and allows hair to appear blonde. Okay, so this is the timeline. This is the accepted timeline. All right, so dealing with this when consciousness came into play. Okay, if consciousness itself within this agreement reality that we have in society began 200,000 years ago in Africa, this means that any assumption that we make about how that person came into being, any assumption about what those people were like, any assumption of anything before that 200,000 year mark is just that, an assumption. Because human beings will never experience anything outside of human perception. Your human perception will always be the tool that you're using to assess something as real. If our ability to consciously perceive did not begin until 200,000 years ago, anything about what may or may not have happened before that point is an assumption. So that means that any axiom that exists in the scientific community, that exists in the mathematical community, in any legal community, in anything that we use to where we say that's how we prove something is real, anything before that 200,000 year mark is an assumption. Now, that means at least 100,000 years in which people only kind of look one particular way for the most part. This is just based on the accepted assumptions here. So that means that these people were advanced enough to make tools. They were advanced enough to record their experiences in the form of drawings and arts and artifacts and things of that nature. So they're intelligent enough to see what's happening around them and try to capture that in some way. They were advanced enough to start leaving the continent and surviving in other places. So we're not going to get into a game about whether or not these people were sufficiently able to make conclusions about where they come from or who they are, things of this nature. We're not going to act like it wasn't until I don't know, England started making colleges or something. That's when people were finally able to make sound conclusions on where we come from and so on and so forth. All right. Anything before that is an assumption. Now, if you are a people who settled, came into being, arose in a particular area after that initial migration, and after a few generations, you don't have any people living who had interaction with those original people from the 200,000 years forward, then of course it is natural for you to create axioms that are rooted in your memory of how long you've been here and how long you've lived in the area, and you mix that with some of the folklore that has survived in order to be able to create a picture of where you came from, what you are, and all of this. And those customs, they have a sort of societal value, but that does not negate the fact that there is history that exists before those assumptions that you made, and your assumptions are reliant on the existence of the assumptions that allowed people to get there and become you in the first place. If we can get through that idea alone, that would do us so much good. Just as a whole human race. If you want to come together, you have to at least be reasonable and receptive enough for this particular set of axioms, because the authorities that are determining your livelihood right now, the sciences, the laws, the like all of those structures that you personally rely on, this is what they believe and what they agree upon. So your disagreement with that doesn't help you in any particular way. It would just be pride or just willful, neglect of the truth. Once again, it's your choice to do so, but at least for the sake of civility in this world, be willing to accept the fact that that is something that you have accepted to deny, not because it isn't true. Don't get out here and be like, oh, that's not true, that's not true. No, keep it real and say, hey, I know that's true. I just don't accept it. Keep it 100. I can respect that. All right. So as it comes to the conversation with regards to what we are, where we come from, such concepts as God and, things of that nature that we hold dear here in the U.S., it has come to my attention that there are specific sources, many of them which are old, some of them which involve spiritual experiences that have happened in the present that happen to be consistent with the events and things that are told in these ancient teachings and practices and things of that nature. There's no short supply of that. The unfortunate aspect in that is that some of the people and or organizations who both have and who may or may not present that truth publicly also tend to be some of these individuals or bodies that are not necessarily the most agreeable with regards to people being receptive to what they are presenting. And you can only make an honest assessment of the truth if you have complete information. We should be able to agree upon that. And you have very educated, very well-meaning individuals out there, some of whom are very popular online, on YouTube and different places, who make very compelling arguments based on what has been made available to them, what they can go through and their constituents and predecessors have determined, oh, this is a credible source. Well, within your agreement reality that is making the rules right now, you have these things that allow you to feel like you're right. And can't anybody do anything about it, right? Well, this does not take into account the mystery traditions, which are held by several societies. This isn't some hocus pocus, boogeyman type of stuff. These are real types of initiations that aren't always necessarily, oh, I want to keep something away from you so I can control you. There is a lot of that going on. But in some cases, as I have said in other videos, there are things, it's not, on one hand, you may say it's not fair for somebody to say what you are and aren't ready to know. But in my Qigong training alone, there were certain things where you can know it all day, but if your body isn't conditioned enough, it's the equivalent of you trying to go out and run a triathlon in the Olympics without ever having trained. Like, you've been a couch potato, haven't run a single mile in ever, and then you just try to go out. You can have all the determination in the world, you can have all the freedom to do it in the world, but once that heart says, you dead. It'll just fall out, right? So it's the same thing. So a lot of these initiations were literally the types of things where if you attempted some of these things, and mind you, this is the third thing that I'm going to give you that's important. In thermodynamics, so within the realm of the second law of thermodynamics, so this is one of those scientific principles that's considered one of these axioms that is just so much built upon. So within a closed system, so your body counts as a closed system because there's stuff going on inside there that works better when stuff ain't leaking out of you. Within a closed system, the words energy and information are pretty much one and the same. They're synonymous. This being because the total energy within that system can be seen as the number of steps and the nature of the steps that it took from going from a point of its most simple to its most complex. We call that entropy, and that can also be interpreted as the amount of steps it took to go from order to chaos. Okay, and so this is one of those concepts that just governs everything in the physics that we know. All right, and so like I said, there's information there such that if things become a certain way, if I know every step that it took to get that way, I can reverse those steps and then bring that system back into the state it was in. When you live in a chaotic society, the only way to bring it back to a state of order is for you to know the earliest point that you can in that entropy. So it is in your best interest when coming up with solutions for when you're coming up with solutions for how to improve society, the further back you can go before things became the chaos that it is now, the better chance you have of finding solutions that will trump any other solution that could be presented in the present. It's kind of like that paradox where people talk about, what if you could have built a time machine and gone back in time to World War II and killed Hitler before he ever got a chance to get up and go on? Of course, you'll receive arguments of how problematic that could turn out, because there are a lot of things that have been built on the fact that the world was forced to come into this state of togetherness in order to rebuild the world. So if you take out one catalyst, you also take away anything that happened, good or bad, as a result. Well, in that case, you go back and you say, okay, well, what could have been done to prevent? Some say go back and kill Hitler before while he was a baby, or to keep him from being born in the first place, stuff like this. Well, let's go back and say, okay, well, what was the ideology that led to Hitler being possible in the first place, and what was the purpose of that ideology coming into play? Because not always do the things that come to harm us, not always are they created with an intent to harm us. Many of these things, they are created with an intent that makes sense at the time. And then as time progresses, these things get out of control. And like I said, they progress into chaos. So once again, it's entropy. It's not just something that happens in physics and thermodynamics and all those fancy words. Okay. And so as I presented to you, any assumption that of what we were or who we are before 200,000 years ago, when all your great 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 a million times great 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 grandma and granddaddy was black. I don't care what color you is. All the way back then, the authority would undoubtedly be the people who saw it firsthand. Well, we even have a problem with that. Now, it is already known that in the Bible that Paul, he never met Jesus while he was living, and in fact, this was a source of a great deal of contention with the other apostles who walked alongside him at times. And sometimes he would agree with them, and sometimes he would go off and do his own thing anyway. And so you basically had somebody that was speaking on behalf of a man that he claims to have met in spirit after the transfiguration, that none of the other guys could confirm, and it still made it into the Bible. As if that wasn't enough, the Gospels that we look at for the life and times of Jesus most closely, of the three, yeah, I could include John in there too, but then of the main three that we talk about, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew was the only one that was an apostle that walked alongside Jesus like that. So that means, so in the case of Luke, he was a doctor turned historian who hadn't met Jesus personally, but he took it upon himself to go and ask around, get the accounts, do some digging. In the case of Mark, he was, am I getting them backwards? No, it should be Mark. Yeah, that's right. So Mark, he was actually a teenager during the time that Jesus was ministering, as the story goes. We're not gonna get into semantics about who exists. Not gonna get into semantics about who exists or what you believe or whatever else. As the story, the accepted canon goes, um, Mark was only a teenager. He was not one of the apostles, and he is considered one of these people that was kind of around enough to be able to speak on the subject matter. Okay, so this means we have several people in this text who have accounts that they did not witness firsthand, but for whatever reason, that particular group of people that that faith or whatever else, they accept these to be credible within the confines of what they accept as true. Okay, so in other words, unless Jesus put a pen to paper himself and told you this, that, and the other, even the most righteous of people, they are still subjecting what they are being told and what they are experiencing to their own tool for assessing reality, just like that reality TV show I described earlier. So you're not getting 100% truth per se, you're just getting the best truth that's available. 99% is still not 100%. So let's be realistic and say this is what we have to work with, and as of right now, that's the best we've got to prop something up. Okay. So let's talk about God. Who is God? What is God? You've basically been taught and you've been conditioned in such a way to where you have accepted that the best somebody could give you is an opinion or an assumption, and that's okay. But once again, when you have people who have been around a lot longer to think on this subject matter, who have had a lot longer to test the consistency of said subject matter, and you have people who have had motivations, usually power, to create assumptions not for the sake of truth, but in order to maintain or to gain power, which we know this isn't a secret, this isn't conspiracy, it's just a fact that we have come to accept in society. Well, when you have these things at play, it comes down to you as the individual to decide what your measurement test is going to be as it relates to truth. And the truth can be inconvenient. It could be inconvenient, especially if you're the one that's benefiting on the constructed narrative. I get it. And you're not going to give that up easily. And so it is on the people who are willing to delve and see, okay, what is the base axiom informing all the other truths? And because I'm committed to truth and not the ego or to even personal gains or even survival, I'm committed to the truth itself. I'm gonna go with this. So I'm gonna give you tools so you can, I'm not gonna even tell you what it is. I got the evidence is painstaking, and so many cultures have said this exact same thing, and it's ridiculous. So I'm not even gonna do that. But what I will do is give you the tools, and I'll tell you why these tools. So your best friend is going to be etymology. So ETYM. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, ETYMOLOGY. Mology. Etymology, which is the origins of words. Words are also subject, language is also subject to the entropy that I just described, which means that the meanings become more complex, varied, and chaotic as time progresses. But if you understand the initial meaning of it, this gives you insight into the motivations for why those particular words evolved and changed the way they did. When you are assessing scripture and things of that nature, it's important that you understand which words were used specifically in the context of those languages, um, which lose a lot of their context when translated into languages that do not have the same dynamics. You have to take that into consideration. So once again, Bible, if you don't understand the Torah, the Old Testament, as in terms of Hebrew language, and in addition to that, if you also do not understand Hebrew language through the lens of Jewish mysticism, you're gonna miss 80% of it. So that's that. And then also you cannot have a complete understanding of the New Testament without understanding some of the context within the original Greek that it was presented in, as well as the philosophical and mystery traditions that were, particularly the Platonic traditions, that were the prevalent thought processes when these books were written. So anything other than that is face value. So once again, etymology is your best friend. There's etymology online. There is all sorts of great tools for you to be able to simply just check out a word, check out a meaning within the context of how it began, and it will give you new insight into how that word has changed. Okay. The importance of this, and so you're not just taking it back to any old word. Well, you've got two languages in particular that are important for you to be able to understand the power structure of this world. The first, of course, being Latin, and then you know that because that's what all the laws are written, all the rules, these different precedents in our legal system are based around Latin. So that's part of it. Well, you also have to compare that against Proto-Indo-European language. So Proto-Indo-European language is this theoretical language that was assembled relative to the rules of all the various languages that evolved from this like source. And there was a rhyme and reason and method to how Proto-Indo-European was encoded in order to hold certain truths and evidences. Okay, and so these languages in particular are the underlying structure for many of the secrets of Freemasons and other secret societies. These languages are actually derived from alchemical understandings, from alchemy, which can be dated back at least as old as pre-Islamic Arabic alchemy. Most of the alchemy in the world is based on that. Some of the seminal texts, some of the most prevalent texts that were, what the foundation of what became European alchemy and all of that stuff. It originates with that, and then that Arabic, early Arabic alchemy is derived from earlier traditions from Kim, which is the pre-dynastic civilization before Egypt, dynastic Egypt, if you will. Okay, and then this has extensions to the north in Libya. It has extensions to as far west as West Africa with like the tribes of Mali, the Dogon, even the traditions of Yoruba and the Igbo, and all these different tribes can be traced to similar underlying alchemical knowledge that evolved and was embedded into the overall workings of everything in society. If you understand the alchemical meanings of stuff, you can see the symbolism in a lot of places that you look at as reliable sources. And I won't get into some of that. That's one of those things that now that you know, you can dive into it, figure it out. Okay. Uh so that's that. So that's one of your tools. All right. The other tool, so let's get into some. So Sanskrit. So the Sanskrit language is designed based on the resonance of the sounds themselves, which means that each one of these sounds has been tested over thousands of years to figure out the physical and other energetic principles and things around you that the very sound vibration of these words impact. Many of these, really all of them, in some way, shape, or form, resonate in the body or near the body. And so once you have broken something down to its Proto Indo European root, this then gives you the bridge to be able to translate over to Sanskrit and then learn the actual vibrational quality of those words, because the assembly of vibrations is how this reality is both built, how your consciousness and your mind shapes things. If sound frequencies are applied in specific ways, it does alter the way that you perceive reality and which things your brain will prioritize as solid, um, and so on and so forth. So these are important tools. Once you get there, so in the yogic sciences, because these sounds vibrate for very specific parts of the body, the brain is wired to be able to interpret those vibrations and be able to translate those into mind images of information. So in other words, this is the key to being able to read the information that is stored inside of your body. It's not one of those overnight things. I can promise you. It takes time of doing this and building it up, and your body getting sorted out, aligned the way it needs to. But this is a very real thing that I have experienced, and it wasn't one of those things somebody told me I would experience. It's one of those things, and you'll see that this is often the case in um, our Eastern traditions, is that they will give you the practice, tell you to do the practice for a certain amount of time, and not tell you what the hell you're even looking for. It's just that when something happens, you ask about it, and then if it's the thing that they know is supposed to happen, they'll say, okay, now you're ready for the next thing. Okay. And so, yes, there is a checks and balances as that relates. The next tool. Now, I'm going to say something, and it may not, I'm going to try to give it to you as complete and short as possible, but you may not fully understand it and be able to digest it right now. But don't worry, I'm writing material and I'm going to be explaining this type of stuff for God knows how long. But everything, go ahead and get this in your head. Everything is real. It's just that you have mechanisms embedded in your brain that allow you to filter through all of those things and interpret a stable reality. The sooner you can get past that, the sooner you will understand how certain things that you think couldn't possibly exist and certain things that seem to contradict each other can coexist in how we go about interacting with one versus the other. This is a very old concept, and you have people from my generation who are starting to find new methods of accessing these types of skills, um, not knowing that they're actually reflective of things that have existed for thousands of years. But that's usually the best way to kind of learn this stuff, is for you to stumble upon it yourself and engage with it until you figure out what the heck is going on. All right. So this does go back to that whole Bohr complementarity thing as well, because the other part of complementarity involves this notion that there are certain properties of things that cannot be viewed at the same time as something else. What I mean, or measured at the same time as something else. Okay. All right. So what I mean by that, you can't measure certain properties while others are being measured. You cannot measure the speed of something at the exact same time as its current position. Because in order for you to have a position, that means it is a fixed point in space, and that thing has to stop moving in order for you to measure that position. You can predict the position of a moving object, but you cannot measure it. These are two properties. So, and if I'm measuring the speed of it, I can't also measure its position because its position is in constant change. So this is just one of those accepted common type of calculation, scientific types of axioms that are out there. One of the things that Bohr put forth. So that said, you have this concept of imaginary numbers. So if you want to understand why there is a precedent for the concept of everything existing, you can look at imaginary numbers. This phrase was coined by Rene Descartes. He was a French philosopher, among other things, scientist, whatever you want to call him. And he was the one that said, he was the one that decided to term certain things as being imaginary, such as what we call I, which is the square root of a negative number, which is usually -1. So the reason that we would consider that an imaginary number is because a square root is based on the assumption that you're able to multiply something by itself in order to get the thing that you're taking the square root of. As you know, there is no thing that you can multiply by itself exactly in order to get -1. In order to get -1, you have to have a +1 times a -1. Those are not the same number. So we call this an imaginary number, the square root of -1. Now, that said, the fact that I can say the square root of -1, it exists. It exists as a thing. It's just that it does not fit within the math, the linear math that we're used to. So whenever you run into one of these things, which is called a paradox, somebody has to create more math, new math. They have to create more math in order for that thing to be able to function. Well, sure enough, some years later, you had Euler. I can't think of what his first name is. You know, all these foreign names, but but Euler, he realized that, okay, well, if I'm dealing with 2 dimensions instead of 1 dimension linear math, then I could look at it as a circle, a rotation on a coordinate plane. So if you don't remember high school math or middle school math, a coordinate plane is the You got the y-axis and your x-axis, and you have points and coordinates on them. Well, you have the numbers 1 and you have the number -1 on there. And so Euler basically came up with this concept where if you draw a circle that has a radius of 1, that means that if you draw a line from the center of that circle to the edge of that circle, its measurement is 1. And I draw that all the way around. If I start at 0 as the center and I draw that circle around, it's going to pass through the points on the x-axis. It's going to pass through +1. On the y-axis, it's going to pass through +1. On the x-axis on the other side, it's going to go through -1. And on the y-axis down here, it's going to go through -1. And it goes back up to +1. So we got us a circle with a radius of 1. So basically, he created this type of math that deals with complex numbers. Complex numbers are created from the combination of what we would call a real number, which is the ones that we can get, using the linear regular math, and then it is combined with a imaginary number, and which is like the one I just described, and it basically finds a path between the two. So there is a reconciliation and agreement between what is real and imaginary, and so it creates this third situation, which we call complexity. So if you recall from previously in the conversation, entropy is when something simple or orderly becomes more complex or more chaotic over time. And so the way that we manage change as a human being is we describe things in terms of the complexity that comes about when we take something that is real and we take something that's real and we then apply imagination to it. So imagination does not mean fake. It simply means that which is not manifested in the classical sense of physicality. We're talking about something that could very well exist in wave form, and we have yet to observe it in a way that causes that wave particle duality that Bohr talks about to take place, such that we see a solid particle. Our brain accepts the signals that we're receiving as this thing being solid. And so you would literally, as this conversation suggests, you would have to be somewhat of a mathematician to even be able to conceive the idea that everything can be existent, and doesn't necessarily have to be separated in terms of what we think is real versus imaginary, because everything that you imagine about what's happening around you has an effect on how you react in the real world. If I imagine that this dude got a problem with me, I might attack him thinking that he was going to do something to me. So it's an imaginary situation that resulted in a real action. So it is what it is. But case in point, the people, the authorities that tell you what is real and what isn't real, they know very well within their framework of mathematics and science and so on and so forth that there is no such thing as not real or existent, so much as can it exist within the framework of measurements and tools that are available to us right now in order to be able to measure it. And the people who get the Nobel Prizes, the people who get their name on things and whatever else, these are the people who create the framework, who create the construct, who create the math necessary for something to occur as true. So this is the other challenge that we have with true, is that something that was originally not true in our agreement is now accepted as true because we have created the science or math or whatever necessary to understand how that thing could be true and how it could be applied. One of my favorite examples, once again, the framework we were using in the early 90s. Um, it told us that dinosaurs were lizards, and so Jurassic Park went in with that. Well, as you can see in some of the later Jurassic Park series, they had to come to terms with the new science that was saying that these some of these dinosaurs were more closely related to birds and chickens than to lizards. And so they started making adjustments. You started seeing the dinosaurs that had a little bit of feathers on them and stuff like this. And so as new information presents itself and new evidence presents itself, we as humans tend to create new frameworks to assess the truth. Well, part of the problems that we have today is because we're still using the old, outdated tools in order to measure new realities. New reality is constantly expanding and becoming more complex. And if you're still using the old tool, the old mind to assess them, while it will give you the opportunity to measure the distance between the tool that you need now versus where the tool used to be, it still causes you to be rigid in a way to where you cannot build the structures necessary to have stability in your assessment of reality. And that is how majority of people are walking around here right now. They do not have updated hardware or software necessary in order to assess a very different reality from the time when our parents or grandparents were young people or when they were living or whatever. Okay. And this brings me to some of the things that are happening with the out of body and near death experience community. So there are some advanced things being put out to the public that I too have experimented successfully with that allow you to experience this reality in a more expanded version than what our waking experience allows. This does have a large part to do with the fact that the right side of the brain takes in all information regardless of what it is, and the left side of the brain is the one that kind of cuts it apart. It's the left side of the brain is the one that's discerning and deciding which information to prioritize. So in other words, if you shut that left side of the brain down enough, you can receive all the information, and it also opens you up to suggestion in that state of which things to think about. Because when you don't have that filter, everything occurs to you as real. Your brain will interpret everything as physical, and this is this is something that is going to present a level of contention in the future, because integration will require, so it is very important that people learn how to access that side of things. Just to give you a assessment of the future, what will be necessary as well is that you have enough of a grounding before encountering these experiences, such that the information that you are drawing in can be organized in such a way to where it is easier to bring back into the bodily experience, the living experience, so that you can relay that information to other people in a way that resonates with this version of reality. That's a mouthful in order to basically say there are very old um, there are very old initiations, practices, information systems that have been developed for the sole purpose of you being able to assess what you're seeing on that other side in the way that is intended for you as a incarnate soul. And the problems that have come along with this, where you have people who have had the opportunity to, by some means or another, sometimes it's just trauma. Some people get a bang on the head and then this ability kicks in. But the various ways, it is something that you can activate intentionally. But what happens is that reality can be tampered with. So whatever people are thinking, if especially when you have a large group of people who agree to a particular type of reality, it is possible for them to generate a perception and interpretation of information that has things appear to you in one form or another if you don't have a base axiom that translates that information. So a lot of the symbolism, a lot of the mythical creatures and beings and stuff that you have in lore, there is a way to experience those exactly as written. However, until you come to certain base assumptions that are not simply of your creation for convenience, but assumptions that align with the actual structure of all that exists, until your understanding aligns with that, you will not have access to the true experience, the true visual of what it is you're supposed to be getting from this information. And I know that sounds kind of vague. I'm trying to be responsible with that because we are at a stage of our evolution. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you just don't know. But we're at a stage right now where it is becoming um, far more available for people to have these kinds of experiences to at least know something's happening. It, like you can come to your own conclusions about what is happening, but it is literally the difference between learning to ride a bike versus somebody telling you what it's like to ride a bicycle. Because no matter how good a linguist you are at describing what it's like to experience balance while riding on a bicycle, until a person gets on a bicycle and feels that and that thing clicks for themselves, even the best description pales in comparison to the actual experience. And so, like I told you, that's one of those things I've kind of dedicated my life to, is if something appears to be falling in line with this structure that's becoming apparent as a factor of um, having examined and tested many of these things, then it is up to me, with my commitments, to actually try that thing out, see if what people are saying about it is true, and then investigating further. So even like I know, like a lot of people are using the out of body experience thing in order to learn such things as they tap into like your soul records, like just learning like what is your purpose for being here, and just certain various things that various types of information that is of a high spiritual level. Well, me personally, one of the things that I was personally interested in is the structure of that reality. Like looking at like what is this made out of? What how does it behave and just the nature of it. And this gives you insight into how information is communicated to you while you're in that state, and then the most efficient and effective ways to be able to translate that when you wake up so that you can give somebody something useful. And means of verifying, like I'm talking about, like everybody's doing things that are remarkable, like being able to like write a number on like have somebody write a number on a board or a piece of paper across your house, and then have one of these out of body experiences, go view the number, and then when you wake up, tell the person to confirm that you saw what you saw. You're like it is passing reality tests in this shape and form. Okay, so we're talking about something that's very real, very scientific, something that you do have access to, that you can learn, take the proper steps, and you know you can make whatever assumptions or assessments as to what those things really are, or whatever else. But it's undeniable once you've had the experience that something is happening, regardless of what explanation you want to give for it. And so a lot of things fall into that exact category in our reality. There's a lot of things that we can't deny is real, but it's just that we can't really come to an agreement on what that thing is that we're experiencing. So and there are explanations for those things. There is language to describe a lot of those things. Sometimes that language does require the combination of several languages that split off from a common understanding once upon a time. And that's where a lot of those mystery traditions come into play. But everything is real in that regard. And so I just want you to know that when there is a conversation coming that will be regarding the truth of who God really is and always has been, what that word itself even means, on a vibratory level, what it means. There is a conversation coming with regards to the true nature of what these UFO experiences are. And there will inevitably come a place where science is going to have to drastically overhaul itself and stop denying the role of consciousness and perception in the wave duality that that creates what we perceive as a solid experience. And um, I'll say just be receptive, just be open, look at everything. I know some of my some sources are a little harder for certain groups to partake in, because of historically how these things have been presented. And one place where a lot of secrets are held, because we all know that you're probably not going to look there, is the Nation of Islam. Like, I know what it has been presented as, and some of the way that certain teachers have been presented in that. But I'm telling you, as my white listeners out there, you would probably not get a complete version of what is really taught and really believed by the Nation of Islam. You will always get the surface version, and then part of that has been part of these same kind of initiation traditions where you have to go through a certain level of commitment before they will reveal the real meanings behind some of the statements that are made. But I've given you tools like etymology. I've given you some of these tools that you can use. So all I'll say is, if you look at a particular statement, especially those statements that seem jarring to you, and you break them down etymologically, you will see that there is an underlying sort of understanding, that does not necessarily negate the surface meaning, but understand that the way that things have manifested on the surface is the result of the underlying principle or energy, the underlying axiom up under that. Perfect example is, you have several stories that are similar. Like, for instance, you have like the Jesus resurrection story, which we also see in the story of Horus in Egypt, like that, thousands of years before. And then you got things happening in the Hindu story. So you have all these stories, and it's not that this person copied that person, or they try to change this, that, and the other. What happens is that there is a single underlying cosmic principle that is being described by every single one of those stories, that does not negate. It doesn't necessarily negate the it doesn't negate the historical authenticity of those events. It's just that oftentimes, because we have heard certain stories over and over as society, we have a tendency to build buildings and architectural structures, and build practices, and build all sorts of things, and we name cities after legendary cities and things of that nature. Like, there's a Rome, Georgia. Go figure. But we have a tendency to reuse things, and as a result of putting those things into our society, we end up having a lot of the same situations happen. If you had a giant golden bull 4,000 or 5,000 years ago that caused some civil unrest, and this civil unrest can be tied to the symbolism of said bull, you have to expect that even in a modern society, if you place that bull up and there are people who are aware of what that symbolism is, they're going to react, and things are going to happen that kind of mirror the events that happened with the original bull. So this does have to do with resonance, and time events do have a tendency to gravitate future events toward certain stable resonances, so that events in history tend to repeat themselves. Okay, and so once again, everything is real. It's just a matter of how much information is necessary in order for it to occur as real within your current framework for assessing reality. And you can take that whichever kind of way that you want to take it, but you've got the tools. As much as I would love to spoon feed you what some of these answers are, I have them, and I'm working diligently to kind of put as basic as possible this thing into a book that isn't terribly long. And this will be made available to certain institutions, I guess you could say, because you do need a certain base level of understanding. I'm including a glossary, I'm including diagrams, all sorts of things. So if you're familiar with certain things, it will be a lot easier. But at the same time, it's not one of those things that I want to be secret necessary. If you want to take it and work with it on your own time, then I'm perfectly fine with that, because it's just important that we kind of break up some of these faulty assumptions, some of this inadequate language, and other things that are affecting our ability to assess truth. Because if we can't assess truth completely, we can't take actions that have a lasting impact on our reality. And yes, it's complex, it's high level. As long as this conversation has been, it is still the most simple version of it I could possibly give you, to prepare you for some of the information that's going to come out there. Some of it's going to sound appalling, but if you use the tools that I've presented to you here, it will make a lot more sense, and it will move us at times begrudgingly toward a common truth and reality that is actually functional enough for us to be able to come together and establish peace, harmony, and most importantly, love. Not peace that is forced or forged um, in the form of agreements that force us not to attack each other, but in the shape of a love based situation where we don't need to have those agreements because it's already understood the agreement that we are making by committing to love. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you for watching. If you have, you know, watched all of this, if you watched part of it and want to go back, then I'll go ahead and save this to my wall. If you have questions, please, 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 please ask them. If you haven't seen some of the videos I've done with my mother on her channel, Smart and Messy Situations on YouTube, make sure you go and check those out. I talk in those conversations. We talk mainly about my experiences with Darius J. Wright and his OBE experiences and methods and things of that nature, and some of the context around that. But yeah, on that note, take that, watch it, rewatch it, look up some of the terms that I've put out there and just kind of get it into your subconscious so that when you run into some of these situations in your regular life, you have new tools that you can be experimenting to. And then I'll see you on the next conversation. Peace.